There's a kind of knock at the front door that slices a Saturday morning in half, like someone just announced your quiet life is on indefinite hold, and when it's that hard, two things right away: whatever pleasant dream you were having is dead, and the person on the other side thinks they've been appointed sheriff of the moral universe. That's how my Saturday started, with the kind of pounding that makes you drop your cereal and swear off forever being a responsible adult. I answered the door in taco boxer briefs, and two cops were standing there looking like they'd rather be anywhere else but my living room, which for the record was a crime scene only if bad housekeeping were illegal. They had come because Brenda Higgins called 911. Brenda of the floral bathrobe, the curlers, the neighbor who treats property lines like sacred scripture. Brenda, who once called the city because my recycling bin leaned left by exactly 3 inches. According to her, I had been standing in my living room with a black box peering into her bedroom for 45 minutes like some retired James Bond with a voyeurism problem. I blinked at them, at my taco underwear, at the Oculus Quest helmet lying like a sad black crown on my rug, and then I laughed because what else could you do? I was playing Beat Saber, not plotting a Hitchcock remake. I was ducking virtual walls and swinging neon swords at imaginary blocks. I wasn't casing anyone. They looked at my headset, looked out the window toward her house, blinds closed, her sitting comfortably on a little hill, and the older cop, the one who smelled like donuts and compassion fatigue, softened. "We have to follow up," he said, "but there's no criminal intent here unless bad rhythm becomes a felony." They promised to talk to Brenda. I promised to staple the blinds shut if it would make the problem go away. We both lied a little. Of course, Brenda was already on her porch garden, shears in hand, like an accusation. She accused, I denied, and by mid-morning, a turf war had escalated into full-spectrum passive-aggression cameras mounted on her eaves, pointing at my kitchen, a boombox on a folding chair blasting Wagner at dawn, and a neighborly standoff that made the whole street feel like a reality show audition. I called the cops back. Officer Miller, bless him, explained that security cameras are legal opera at 6 a.m., technically isn't a noise ordinance violation, and fences are regulated by an HOA that thinks individuality is a cosmetic defect. Civil matter, he said. You need a mediator. I needed a wall. The thing about living next to someone like Brenda is she assumes you're normal. That was her big mistake. I'm petty in ways that are both creative and frankly expensive. I have designer brand insomnia, a credit card with a limit that could be described as hopeful, and a mind that gets very happy when it finds a loophole. So I dug not with a shovel, but with Google zoning codes and HOA bylaws, and I found a little jewel from 1974 buried in bureaucratic dust, a clause that allowed freestanding artistic installations or windbreak structures on lots adjacent to drainage zones to be up to 10 feet high. Eddie Haskell would call it ingenuity. Brenda called it villainy. My property line showed her house on a nuisance drainage flag, and mine clear. In plain English, I could legally build a 10-foot structure on my side to protect soil integrity. In creative English, I could legally build a 10-foot wall that would make Brenda's opera sound like someone singing from a different zip code. I called Tony, the kind of contractor whose business card reads like a dare, and told him I needed something that said privacy, looked like art, and made Brenda regret waking up early. Tony arrived in a truck that looked like a tank in a midlife crisis, and by the end of the week, we'd poured reinforced concrete posts and raised cedar like a small, tasteful fortress. He didn't ask many questions. He signed checks and grunts and built things that made neighboring dogs have existential crises. Brenda called the police, the commissioner, her nephew at sanitation. She even threatened to throw my trash cans in a barn or something equally HOA apocalyptic. And the cops read the permit Tony had already taped to my back door and left with that special kind of sympathy reserved for victims of suburban melodrama. That should have been the end, me triumphant in a modest legal way, but there's an art to peacekeeping that I wanted to master. The wall was finished and glorious, but the plywood facing on Brenda's side was raw and humiliating. It blocked her light, it cast her petunias into mourning, and it erased her house like someone had hit hide on the neighborhood. She was furious, hollow-eyed, and certain I had weaponized my property to ruin her life. That's when I called Snake. Snake is not a human name so much as a resume for clever chaos. He paints murals that look like woke nightmares and gets paid in cash and croissants. I told him I wanted one thing, a giant eye. Not a pretty eye, a hyper-realistic, slightly bloodshot eye that would make anyone's breakfast feel observed. He laughed and called it a masterpiece, and by Sunday morning he had a scaffolding and a pallet that made the plywood look like canvas. When Brenda saw it, she snapped, T-mug shattering, cardiovascular event imminent, the full gamut of melodrama. The HOA convened an emergency meeting that Tuesday, and the community center smelled of stale coffee and righteousness. Brenda called it harassment. I called it civic art. The president of the board, a man named Dave, who had a ruler and a history with Brenda's hedges, peered over his glasses at the permit and the mural inside. The paperwork was in order, the structure was legal. The mural, he said, was protected speech, but could I tone it down for community sensitivity? I could have backed down. I did not. I am not proud of the glee that bubbled in me as we added cartoon eyelashes to the eye at the HOA's request, a ridiculous concession that somehow made the whole thing both funnier and more unsettling. Brenda, defeated by paperwork and eyelashes, draped blackout curtains and planted fast-growing cypress-like stakes in a losing hand. She stopped spending mornings on the porch. The opera quieted. The cameras went dark, or at least aimed somewhere else. So did I win? Yes, in the narrow legal sense. I could play Beat Saber with impunity, no longer worried my swings would be misinterpreted as stalking. The wall stood cedar warm in the sunset, a monolith to municipal oddities and the unromantic joy of legal victory. I toasted with a beer slapped on my headset, and for the first time in weeks I danced like nobody was watching, because for once nobody was. But here's the part that keeps me awake sometimes when the neighborhood is quiet and the cedar has a glow that makes me feel both guilty and justified. Justice was served, but not exactly noble justice. I won by exploiting a bureaucratic loophole and by escalating privilege and cash into a silence that cost my neighbor sunlight. I won, but the win felt like a draw at the end of a boxing match where both fighters left the ring bruised and refusing to shake hands. The lesson, if you want to call it that without sounding like a sermon, is this: rules are written for people who know how to read them, and sometimes the law becomes a tool for the petty as easily as it does a shield for the oppressed. Power doesn't need to be loud, it only needs to be literate. You can hide behind statutes and call it civic duty, or you can close your blinds and call it peace. Both can be true and both can be ugly. So I live with a 10-foot wooden eye watching over my yard. Brenda lives with blackout curtains and a row of cypress that will, in a decade, look like a deliberate hedge of secrecy. The opera's gone, the cameras are pointing elsewhere, and my mornings have reclaimed a certain blessed mundanity. I got my privacy, she got her privacy, and the neighborhood got a new landmark that people drive by and call a conversation piece. Was it justice? Depends on what you call justice. Was it beautiful? Sometimes. Was it petty? Absolutely. Did karma serve a dish to both of us? I think so. And here's the real question I'll leave you with, not to absolve myself, not to demand applause, but because I want to know what you think. When the law lets you close a door on someone who makes your life miserable, does pulling that door shut make you a hero or a bully? Sound off below, tell me which side you're on, or better yet, tell me your story about when a neighbor crossed the line and what you did about it. Share, argue, laugh, and if you've ever been on either side of a 10-foot fence, drop a comment because I want to know, were you right or were you human?
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.